Rumor has it that the next big Zelda game could be coming out in the year 2020. And no, I'm not talking about a 2D Zelda, I'm talking about a big brand new 3D open-air Legend of Zelda game along the lines of a Breath of the Wild. Is this reasonable? Could it happen? What sort of changes could we see? Let's talk about it. Welcome everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we're going to be talking about the next big Legend of Zelda game. So there's a rumor going around from King Zell. He has a pretty good track record, so this rumor might be true, but he's been insinuating that maybe we could see the next big Zelda game in the year 2020. Now I'll put a link in the description below so you can look into that if you're curious, but of course it's a rumor, take it with a grain of salt, you never know if it's true or not. Even the most credible leakers have gotten things wrong in the past, so you never really know. But let's take the leaker out of the equation. How reasonable is it to expect a big brand new open world 3D Zelda game in the year 2020? Breath of the Wild just came out March 2017. Of course, I guess at this point we're coming up on a 2-year anniversary for the game, but let's just say this next Zelda game comes out holiday 2020. That would be more than 3.5 years. Is that large enough of a gap? Well, the thing is, usually with your big AAA games, a 3-year gap is pretty reasonable, but when it comes to Zelda, that's pretty quick, because the difference between Breath of the Wild and Skyward Sword was more than 5 years, and the difference between Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess was also 5 years, and then before that it was 4 years for the Wind Waker. Wind Waker came out in 2002, Twilight Princess came out in 2006. So basically throughout the 21st century, when it comes to the big home console 3D Zelda games, it takes quite a long time for them to come out. So if we were to see the next big Zelda game in just 3.5 years, that would be unexpected. Is it impossible? No, it's not impossible, but I'm also not going to assume the next big Zelda game is coming out in 2020, but it might happen, and this is why. If you go back to the 90s when Ocarina of Time came out in 1998, they came out with a game and it was a big thing. It took quite a long time to accomplish that game, but then in just 2 quick years, we got to see Majora's Mask, and then 2 years after that, we got to see the Wind Waker. Like Majora's Mask, I think they could reuse the assets from its previous Zelda game, in this case it would be Breath of the Wild, to turn out another Zelda game in a shorter time span. Now, with Ocarina of Time, they took a lot of the character models and areas and they copied and pasted it into Majora's Mask, so I don't think it's going to be exactly like that, but I think they could at least take the underlying structure, the engine, the physics engine for Breath of the Wild that they spent so many years working on, to bring out the next big Zelda game at a much quicker rate. Now this doesn't mean the next game will look like Breath of the Wild. It may have completely different graphics, the style may look completely different, the way the game may play may feel very different, but they could still be using the physics engine that they accomplished with Breath of the Wild to make this next Zelda game a lot quicker. And if they were to do that, they could probably focus on these 3 years to just make sure this next Zelda game has way more content and is way denser than any previous Zelda game, including Breath of the Wild. So I think it's possible that we could see a Zelda game in 2020, but I'm not going to completely assume it, but I have some hope that we might at least get to see a trailer for it in the year 2020. And when we do eventually see it, I do believe they will reuse at least some aspects of Breath of the Wild, at least in terms of that physics engine, so they won't have as much to focus on in terms of creating the physics for this next big open world game, and they could focus on adding a lot more content, focusing on making this big new world really dense with content. So for example, when you take a look at Breath of the Wild, you may notice that all of the towns and villages are in ruins. There's very few actual fully built towns and villages, everything else is destroyed. But imagine if this Zelda game, instead of having ruins everywhere, has actual towns and cities and villages and castles that you can actually interact with tons of characters. That might be possible this time around. The development team won't have to have this convenient design choice to be set in a post-apocalyptic world, so they won't have as much to develop. They could actually develop whole towns and villages, which would be really exciting to see. And it would be even more exciting if they could focus on adding a whole bunch of unique and quirky characters. Breath of the Wild was kind of lacking in that department. While there were some very memorable characters, most of them were already dead, and they were set in the past, so you didn't really get to interact with them too much. One of the very special things about the Zelda series is that it's known for having very quirky characters, And those quirky characters have served to make the games very memorable. One of the things that was so special about Ocarina of Time is that it was kind of hailed as having a pretty good story, but it wasn't the story itself that made it so special, but actually the characters. So imagine if they were to focus on just creating a lot more unique and really cool looking characters, and they're just all throughout this new, big, dense world for Zelda. That could be really special, not only so they could propel the story and make it even better than the one we got in Breath of the Wild, but also so we could have a lot of really interesting side quests along the lines of what we got in Majora's Mask. This can make the game really, really special. But another thing that can make this game really, really special is that Nintendo and the Zelda team will have learned a lot from what they accomplished and failed to accomplish in Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild was the Zelda team's first real foray into the open world genre, and they did an excellent job. Breath of the Wild is a revolutionary game. It got Game of the Year for a reason. It's one of the best games to come out in the last 10 years or so. It's an incredible, incredible game. It may even be my favorite Zelda game. It's up there. It's very, very good. But it did have its issues, and fans did have its criticisms. A lot of fans didn't like the big main dungeons. A lot of fans didn't like the lack of very bombastic, epic music. A lot of fans didn't like the rain, or how weapons got destroyed very quickly. All of these different things they could rectify with the next big Zelda game. They could bring back some of the big, epic, classical dungeons that kind of tell a story in a very unique way, on top of all these many mini dungeons spread throughout the entire world. They could bring back all of this crazy weather and environmental factors, but maybe come up with different ways to make it not as frustrating for players, like with the rain. Maybe they could just offer you gloves from very early on in the game, so you're not slipping and falling the entire time. When it comes to the weapons, maybe they could just make them overall more durable, but maybe a bit more scarce, but basically just balance out the weapon system a little bit more, so players aren't freaking out because their weapons are breaking all the time. And then of course with the story, while I did like aspects of it, I thought Zelda was very well done. I thought there was a lot of really interesting things about it. Because it was segmented and it was all set in the past, it left a lot to be desired. So going into this next big Zelda game, I have a feeling the Zelda team will do a much better job with the story and how the story plays a role in this new open world, because they're going to maintain the open world structure that they did with Breath of the Wild that's been said in several interviews. The freedom of choice in terms of how you can explore the game at your own pace and do things out of order, that's going to continue to be a staple for the Zelda series moving forward, but there's a lot of things they can improve upon, like the music, like the dungeons, like adding even more bosses and unique bosses with the dungeons. Maybe they can even bring in more varieties of enemies and more overworld bosses. There's so many different things they could do for the next big Zelda game. It's incredibly exciting, and I expect this next Zelda game to surpass Breath of the Wild. Like I said before, Breath of the Wild was Nintendo's first foray into the big open world genre for Zelda. I can only imagine what they can do in their next go. So regardless of when we see the next Zelda, I'm incredibly hyped for it because I know it's going to be very, very special. And it may happen in 2020, but if it happens in 2021 or 2022, that'll be okay, because there's tons of great games to play already, and there's a lot more to come. And there are also rumors of a 2D Zelda coming out in the not too distant future, so hopefully we get to see that game not too long from now. But anyways everyone, those are my thoughts on what we should expect from the next big open world 3D Zelda game for the Nintendo Switch. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And that's all guys, thank you so much for listening and watching. I really appreciate it. If you love Nintendo content, make sure to subscribe. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to hit that notification bell so you can actually see when I upload my next videos. And that's it. I'll see you all really soon. Bye.